Boss Coaching. I'm just going to do a quick intro here, then let Hannah take it away. So we have Coach Hannah Perkey leading us through our book blink today on Redeeming Your Time by Jordan Raynor. She's going to give us some ahas and takeaways, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A, discussion, any questions that you have. So welcome, everyone. We're glad you're here, and take it away, Hannah.
Okay, awesome. Well, like Brooke said, my name's Hannah Perkey, Ops Boss, Elite One-on-One Coach. Hi, Penny. Penny's a past client of mine, so I'm so excited to see you on here. And I run Evelo Team out of Central Indiana for any Indiana referrals that you might have. We'd love to help. Megan and I were debriefing. Megan's on my team. She's, I would say, my chaos coordinator, more officially known as our client care coordinator. But she introduced me to this book. And so we've had a lot of fun talking through what this looks like in real life as she reports to me and as we interface with all the other team members of like, how can we be really healthy in our time? So the reason I'm covering this book is Redeeming Your Time by Jordan Raynor, is because I am full-time CEO, coach, full-time mom. And lots of other things, right? Which I think if I asked you guys, like, what are all the hats you wear? I volunteer at church. We have personal commitments with our friends, right? So we have so many things. And on a regular basis, I feel like I am behind. My strength finders, number one is achiever, which means I want to reach all the goals. And those goals, when I reach them, new ones get set, right? And I have a responsibility up in my top 5, which means if something's not getting done, I take it and put it on my plate. And I'm guessing there's others on here that have those in their top 5. I think that's found a lot in operations people. And so really it's how do we then approach our day? The whole book is really like, hey, we've all been given the same amount of hours in the day. And so why do we see people that are really highly productive, and what's that look like? One of the things I love about Jordan and how he writes is he uses so many examples in his book, and that makes it an easier read for me, right? So I wrote down some of the names in here. He talks about Mr. Rogers, C.S. Lewis, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Mozart, and of course, Jesus, right? Jesus was busy but not hurried. And that was something he talks a lot in his book of, we want to be highly productive and busy, but not hurried in what we're doing, right? And how often have you guys been like I can't even focus? That is not a good productive way and state to be in. So that is kind of the focus of what his book is. All right, so I'm going to walk through what the main points are. He has 7 sections that he goes through, and I think it's a really practical guide of how to approach. So his whole start to it is he does come from a faith perspective. So whether or not you share that, Jordan and I share that, and I think that hit home really good for me. But his first point is when we're talking about where our time is spent, we first need to go to the author of time. I found that so reassuring. That's already really important part of my morning routine. If you've read, what's it called? Millionaire Morning, is that what it's called? That's really what they talk about. What's your morning routine? And so that's really set for me. Yesterday, I was not in a great mood. I was stressed out with some things with my kids homesick and trying to work. And my husband goes, "Did you have your quiet time?" And I said, "Well, yeah, but it's short." He goes, "Maybe you should go have a little more time with Jesus," and sent me right back there. And I'm like, it's good. And so that's Jordan's first conversation point of like, how are we spending time with the author of time? And he gives some practical steps in there. One of the things I took away was praying in the morning that God would help me be productive in the ways he wants me to be. I think that's so good because oftentimes I wake up and my brain's already spinning of the things I think I need to do. But what about you guys have probably experienced like things that are not in your schedule, maybe a side conversation with a person that could be so instrumental in their life and their needs. And that's not on our schedule. So I think when we're giving it up to God of like, what do you need me to be productive with today? It takes some of that pressure off of our schedule. So even if we're amazing at time blocking and we have it all figured out, knowing that it's okay if things go awry. I think that was important. And he also said, you'll never complete your whole to-do list and God's okay with that. And I thought that was such a good thing to remember. I feel like sometimes on my coaching calls, people expect in a business that we just get done with the list and then we're like, yes, we accomplished it. And life doesn't work that way. So I think that was a good reminder there. Okay, so the second point, which Megan and I were just talking about, is let your yes be yes. And he says from your largest to your smallest commitments. And so I have a sticker on the back of my laptop right here that says, when you say yes, you say no to something, right? And so the whole point is, and I've really thought about this as a mother specifically, if I'm agreeing to something, something else has to give, because we all have the same amount of hours and we could sleep less, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. But that's the only other option to that. And so really looking at the opportunities, but also being really clear on our commitments, because we want to be good workers, right? If we say, yes, we'll get something done, we want to get it done. But that means we have to be intentional to not always say yes. Sometimes it's saying no, or sometimes it's saying when, and looking at that from both a work and personal. I've really, from an implementation standpoint, when I read this section, I looked at what are the things, if I look at my order of priorities, right? God first, family second, and then my job, what was number 4 would be like those other commitments with friends, etc. So this year I've tried to really say no to more of those other things if I didn't feel like it was in those top 3, because I don't have any time left. And the only place that time would come from was from my family in the after hours. So I am going to ask for some chat, just because I don't want to talk at you guys for 15 minutes. So I'd love to hear if there's anything in your life right now that you think you should be saying no to in order to be saying yes to those items that are more priority. So if we did an activity and we said, what do you need to eliminate? What are those things that immediately come to mind? Forget what it will feel like to tell that person no, right? That's what Megan and I were talking about, is it doesn't always feel good to be like, no, I can't. Somebody needed a ride to a hospital appointment today from our church, and I couldn't, right? Like I could have made it work, but it wasn't the best choice for my priorities today. That can be a priority for someone else. So type those in there. I'd love to hear. The other thing I want you to answer, who's heard of a commitment tracking system, a CTS? Is that familiar language to anyone? Okay, Megan, can you tell me what a CTS is?
CTS, commitment tracking system. You're thinking like Todoist, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
So Todoist, I think, I forget the other examples that he has in the book, but it's basically a to-do list on steroids. But it's a to-do list that you can prioritize and things like that.
Right. So in his book, he talks about we really need to commit to a single tracking system. So if I popped through the screen and sat at your desk with you guys, I'd be curious. I don't want to show you mine because I'm not fully committed to Jordan Raynor right now. I do have some notes, not part of my CTS, but I do have to-do stuff on my screen. Sometimes we like put notes on our phone. I know one of my team members said I just set alarms, or I take screenshots and email them to myself. Some of us use our email inbox as one of our tracking systems. So he talks about how we have open loops. Have you guys ever heard like a super annoying song on the radio? You turn it off and the rest of the song plays in your head, right? That's how our brains work, is we need to close that loop. He gives an example of you're sitting at a barbecue on a Friday night and all of a sudden you remember something you forgot to do, and that overtakes your brain, right? Because it's an open loop. So at any given time, we could have over 100 open loops playing in our head. So that CTS, that commitment tracking system, is where we take everything, we brain dump it into a system like Todoist. And in Brooke, if you can type Todoist in the chat, I know people are always like, what are you saying? That's the app I use. He gives one in the book that I'd encourage you to check out too, but it's where we say like, hey, get rid of this stuff because this sticky note is from Monday morning and I haven't looked at it since Monday, right? That's the problem, but I'm in Todoist every single day. So he talks about committing to that. So I think that's a really great takeaway. And then we have to commit to using it. And he talks about that later in the book, because sometimes in coaching calls, people be like, all right, I got Todoist, but it piled up. Now I have 100 to-dos, right? Well, we have to use it as a system that operates for us every day in our life. And so when I wake up every day, I have what I need to focus on for work in Todoist, and even for personal, what those items are. If I need to pay a bill or buy something for my kids' class, it's all in Todoist. When I wake up in the middle of the night with something, I go type it in Todoist and then I file it when I get up in the morning, right? It's my commitment tracking system. All those commitments I said I would do for my daughter's teacher, for my boss, they're in that system. So that's section 2. Section 3 is descent from the kingdom of noise. We must fight to block out noise and create time for stillness, silence, and reflection. This one's really hard, I think, in today's world. If you guys looked at some of the noise in your life, and you can throw this in the chat too, what's some of the noise that you have in your life? And I'll give you some examples. We have social media. Facebook is my jam because I'm in my 30s. So I struggle with wanting to just scroll, right? There's notifications galore on your phone. There's yesterday, like my sister called to ask something about something, and people from work call. How many of you get like a gazillion emails about potential trainings you can do in real estate, right? I'm like, so many emails to filter through. So what's the noise in your life that you're dealing with? And then he has so many, I can't even like share all of them, but so many practical applications for dissenting from the kingdom of noise. I mentioned to you guys about Facebook and my addiction there. So recently I took back over marketing, and I find myself checking our social media stats like all the time. Like I'm like, how many views did we get on this video? So one of the things he talks about are some ideas around time limits on the app, deleting the apps. He talks about parenting your phone, which I found was really good, of how do we put our phone to bed? So putting it not only in do not disturb mode, because I already do that in the evenings, but like he literally takes his phone, because he has 2 little kids as well, and he sticks it in the other room and it sits on the charger until after the kids go to bed. And I think for some of us, and it panics me. I'm like, well, what if like my mom calls and has a question between 7 and 9, like what will happen? And so he talks about like, let's get out of that habit of doing all the things. A few years ago, I took off the little red bubble on my email. So I literally will not check my email from Friday at 5 until Monday morning. So if you email me, I'm like super delayed. And but it's been okay. He talks about how you train people of how they communicate. Like, you might not reach me. I've had agents say to me on my team before, like, Hannah, you don't call back. It always takes you 2 to 4 hours. I'm like, yeah, that's on purpose, because I time block when I'm going to return calls and messages. So he talks about that whole piece. And I would encourage you, even if you don't read the whole book, just to look at that section, because we have a lot of noise in our life. Section 4, I won't dig in too much, but it's about prioritizing your yeses. And this goes into a lot of stuff we're probably maybe used to doing in real estate, right? How do we look at our calling? And some of that has to do with like vision boards, setting epic long-term goals. Maybe your team drafts quarterly goals, and he talks about, well, how do you do that individually too? How do you make it into a project with actions? And then how do you lock the non-important things in the basement? And Megan quoted this to me today, and I'm like, that's so good, because I typically in the past, if I had something that wasn't priority, I would just schedule it for like 30 days out. Well, then those would all come flooding at me 30 days later, and I wasn't done with my current priorities, right? So it would blur priorities for me. So locking them in the basement, what that looks like for me now is they go on a list in Todoist with no deadlines. And there's a reminder quarterly to go evaluate what the next quarter's goals are. So I will forget about them for 90 days. And that's what he encourages us to do, so that we can be hyper-focused on what's important. Section 5 is accept your uni presence, focus on one important thing at a time. And the one thing I'm to note here, if you've ever taken Stephanie Brackett's Systems Are Sexy, she talks about some of the projects she's accomplished and how many hours they've taken her. And I don't know the exact numbers. I just know they're like a lot of numbers. And the only way she could accomplish that is knowing her priority and being hyper-focused on that. And so that's what we get to, of being okay that we're saying no to certain things, that they're not a priority. We're not going to get to them. And it's weird in today's world, like people won't always understand that, but then we can actually really dig into what's most important and accomplish that. Section 6 is embrace productive rest. And this was huge applications for me. He talks about getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep, and how scientifically it's very rare that you can live on less than that, and how to like guard that time well. He even made a comment of like, basically, if you go like so many nights without that many hours of sleep, you're like a drunk person. And I've thought that a few times where I'm like, oh, it's okay that I acted like that because I was basically drunk. Like that's what was happening because I don't have enough sleep, right? So I think we have to know like we need that sleep. We can't just burn ourselves out. And again, I've seen that in coaching calls where people are like, I'm just going to put my head down and work, get up early, stay up late. And that is not the right way to approach that. And then last was eliminate all the hurry. So the other takeaways I just wanted to share, he talks about deep work of 90-minute increments. How many of you guys are blocking deep work? Is that anything that you do? Or because I think probably a lot on here do time blocking, but are any of you guys doing like strategy sessions for 90 minutes or more in a day? One. Good, Megan. Implementing book stuff. And then Megan, do you remember what he says to do after deep work?
Take a break.
What kind of break?
A 30 to 45-minute break, I think.
But what do?
You like do something completely different. Like you wash dishes, housework, take a walk, something like,
Yeah.
Because probably, I think he says like, if you're doing like mental work, you should do something physical.
Yeah.
To like break up your brain patterns. And then if you're doing like physical stuff, like say you were doing like an hour and a half of yard work, then you go like read a book or something like that.
Yeah. So most of us are in jobs where we use our brain. I would say actually all of us probably are, right? So we need to switch to physical. And so how this changed my morning routine, like on Mondays, my house is typically trash because I try to chill on Sunday as much as possible. And so I would spend the first of my day cleaning, right? And now I just sit down and I work for an hour and a half, ideally, and then I get up and do my housekeeping. So if you look at my morning, you'll see at like 10:30, 11, I'm housekeeping. So my team's probably like, what is she doing? Or I'll take a walk in the middle of the day, right? And it's because I've tried to do some deep work. What I'll tell you, I've noticed is when I do that, my guess is some of you in the day and you're like, I can't breathe. That was so much. And please don't talk to me. Right. And it's because we've not taken those moments of rest. And that's what I'm catching in myself is when I do have those transition times and I do get refreshed. One, it allows us to think clear, but it also allows us to be less stressed. I feel my stress right here when it's too much, and everyone feels it in different places, right? Yours might be a stomach ache, a headache, etc. But mine's pressure on my chest. And so walking for me is what I've realized is my thing to get away. So I think what I've loved in total about this book is there's different things where I felt bad for sleeping enough or taking a break. And it's empowered me to say, actually, I'm better for my team if I do those things for myself. Okay. So those are my biggest highlights. Obviously, there's lots of ahas, and I'd love to share more, but I'd love to hear if there's any questions, anything that stuck out to you, like, oh, that's something I'd like to read more about, anything that you guys have. Okay.
I think it's funny that we have, especially like those of us that are in like our late 20s, mid 30s, that we have this ingrained in us that like, oh, I have time to relax. It's like, okay, what can I be doing to relax that's more productive? Like that is where our brain is like always will go. And I don't know if obviously it's something with our generation, but you know, it's very hard to break that habit of just sitting and being where you're at. And Ellen Marie's my one-on-one coach, and she always tells me that. She's like, why do you feel bad for taking a breath? She's like, just be where your feet are. And I was like, well, but I can be more productive while I do that. And she's like, no, that's not how that works.
Yeah. And I think it's something. So the other day, my daughter was on her tablet playing a game and she asked me to turn on her TV show. And I said, why do you need two things going at once? But I think the world we're living in is so filled with noise, first off, that it's hard for us to sit and do nothing, right? Like, do you ever just sit in nature, not reading a book, like just sit? That's very weird, right? Like not normal for what we're used to, but very healthy. But I think the other part, Mackenzie, is probably like how a lot of us are built from a productivity standpoint. Like I was sharing about my strength finders. The other day I sat down on the couch to chill, and mind you, I had like graduation cards to fill out and like some other. So I had a whole to-do list, but it was sitting in my living room. So to me, it felt like a break. That's not a break, right? So yes, I think it's good for us to learn about ourselves through some of those personality things to know. And we did that overwhelm burnout conversation a few weeks ago. And my biggest aha from that was like knowing your strength finders and what it takes for you to heal. And for me as an executor, it's doing something like in nature, non-work related, and that's not my natural. So yeah, that's a really good one. Thanks for sharing that. Anything else? Okay.
I think one of the, sorry.
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
think one of the things that I remember from this book when I first read it, that was kind of like a paradigm shift for me was, I can't remember which chapter it's in, but it's like taking away the noise in your day and like which apps and things take the most concentration away from what you're currently doing. And he recommends not checking the news anymore. And because honestly, your friends, like you should just get your news from other people. Other people will very happily tell you what's going on in the world. And I wasn't like committed to checking the news every day before, but I fully have stopped checking the news except for maybe like once a week. And I'm still up to date on big events. Like I don't feel behind necessarily. Like the things that are important to me and the people around me, they're more than happy to tell me about it themselves. And I don't have to go research the information myself. Which, I mean, you got to be careful about that. You want to make sure that you're doing your research as well on something important. But at the same time, I'm not spending hours of my time researching a topic and reading articles versus getting somebody else to tell me like, hey, this is the top thing happening right now. And here's a summary of it. And I can go research it further if I want.
Absolutely. Yeah, I said something in there about like, do you actually need the app on your phone for those goals? I reread that this week and I was like, I need to go back through and see, because I get so overwhelmed sometimes with all the things I need to check between Slack and GroupMe and email and Facebook and Instagram, right? Like there's a lot of places.
Taking away the bubble on my mail was like huge for me.
Yeah. Such
a stress reliever, like, because I can't leave an email unread. It just drives me insane.
Me too.
I need to, like taking that away, I just don't see it.
Yeah. Yeah. Sarah Reynolds, if you guys are familiar with her, she runs, I think, the biggest, if not in the top 3 KW teams right now. And she's a mom, and she had shared a few years ago about some productivity habits, and the bubble was one of her things. And if you have an iPhone, there's all the different focuses, and you can go in and set like who can get to you. Like my husband's the only one that can get to me on 2 of the focuses in case there's something with our kids. And so I use those like at sleep time, so my phone can't buzz. And even with like text and stuff, it doesn't pop on till 8 a.m. when I'm done with my quiet time. Because if not, I'll start doing all those things. I'll open those loops, right, to start responding. And then in Gmail, you can pause your inbox. I'm not as good at that, but I'm really trying to pause it. And then I time block when I get into my email 3 times a day. That's on my calendar. It's been a habit I'm trying to form so that you don't just read the email, star it, come back to it, process it again, etc. Okay. Anything else?
Hannah, I was kind of wondering, just for people in our community, I know that there are those that struggle with, like, I can't put down my phone because work might need me, or I can't take X amount of time off because work might need me. And just that incoming noise and pressure, what would you recommend for people there?
Yeah. Megan, do you remember my quote on this about our industry?
Nothing is an emergency. She and I used to work in an industry that there were actual literal emergencies, like people at the emergency room in life or death situations that we needed to answer immediately. And if somebody doesn't get their mortgage question answered for 12 hours, it's going to be okay.
Yeah. So I say no one's going to die in our business. But I do think it's about setting expectations for sure. I've talked to some of our agents about this because I'm not selling actively, and I think that can be different. But I think when you tell someone like, hey, you'll get a response from me within 2 business hours. So you figure out for your job what's reasonable first off, but figuring out what's reasonable and then making sure they know what their options are. I think when it's just left in cyberspace and they're like, I don't know if Penny heard me, is she going to get back to me? If you tell them like, hey, I'm in here at 8 and noon and 5 and 8 p.m. well, then you still have a lot of gaps where you're not committed, right? And then I think when it comes to vacation, I could do a whole conversation on the importance of vacation. I take a lot of vacation. I think it's really good and healthy for you. But then it's about your who and letting that person be your filter. So if I'm on vacation, Megan's my filter. I might talk to her 0 to 1 time in a 7-day period, but she will take care of those non-life or death situations that are real estate emergencies. And then the rest will, be communicated. And I know and trust that we're cross-trained in that arena.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And I know that will help a lot of people to hear that.
Awesome. Well, good. Well, if you have anything else, I'm happy to share my contact info. I'll throw that in the chat really quick. And if you guys read it, I'd love to hear your takeaways. I'm reading, like Megan said, she's reading or read Master of One. I'm reading that currently. I think they're really practical, easy reads. They're not dry. I think I sped through this. And when I say I read as a mom, I Audible. That's my reading right now. That's all I can do. And so I read through it on Audible in less than a week. So love it. Thank you guys for joining. And if you have any other questions, just let me know.